Great to see the turn up this early in the morning. I hope you all got your coffee. I said before I'm Ulle 2.0 because Ulle could unfortunately not make it today. So if you don't see the familiarity in the face, well, you're still in the right room talking about regulations, Cyber Resilience Act, a little bit how it will impact us as developers and the open source community. So I'm going to give a little short introduction to myself. I'm a director for product security in ASSA ABLOY Global Solutions. I work down here in the south of Sweden. And I'm also participating inside of the Swedish Institute for Standards, trying to come up with, how can we make good security controls in order to fulfill the regulations together with other industry and national experts. So we are focusing on Radio Equipment Directive, if you heard about that, and Cyber Resilience Act. And trying now to see how can we help our politicians to make good use and write good standards here together. I got about 20 years background in product development and in security. I've been primarily focused on embedded system, IoT, Linux, Yocto, working quite closely with the open source community. And recently I got a passion into astrophotography. So if you have any questions, catch me afterwards. And we're a small, neat community looking at the stars. So the regulation of digital products is here. When we look at digital products, what's that? Well, short answer, anything with any kind of code running inside of it, processing something. And we need to understand a little bit, why is this coming? And it's not only coming in Europe, it's coming all over the world. We see it in the United States, we see it in Asia Pacific, we see it in Europe. So this is similar to when we had GDPR, or if you were here when we had the regulation of EMC. This is the same magnitude, but it's now coming to us as software developers and to our software industry. And we need to understand now, how can we tackle this here together? So why is it coming now? Why didn't this happen 10 years? Why can't we wait another 5 so we can just push out our features? Well, you remember all these old things. Quick show of hands here. How many have been participating in fixing some of these here? Okay, good. So how many were here for the Heartbleed? How many were here for Log4j? And how many, hand on heart, has fixed HTTP2 that was released within a month? 1, 2. Okay, good. So keep working. So we had these, coming again and again and again. So usually what happens is, something shows up in your scanner. Customer calls you. Your manager pulls you in and say, hey, I need you. I need you to come with me. I'm sometimes that person. I want you, come with me. We need to sit down. We need to analyze it. And what has happened is our customers calls us or someone else within the development or, our CI/CD pipeline flags something in the morning. We get in and we say, okay, we need to do stuff. So are we impacted? Contact vendors. We need to maybe answer some questionnaires because you start to develop, then your customers call you, your product managers come in and say, well, are we impacted or not? And you still saying, okay, let me get back to you after lunch. I still got some things to investigate. Then the coordination starts. So if you've been a part of Log4j, etc., you know it was not simply my code base. It was a little bit more difficult than that. Can we short-term fix it? Operations ask you. Or if you have a cloud development team, they say, OK, how can we mitigate this in our products? Should we turn off all the logging? No. Hey, we need the logins to see if someone is in our systems. Well, it's going to get a little bit hairy here. So, and then you say, well, I need 4 developers. I need probably the 4 best ones because I want them with experience and I want to know where is the vulnerable component. But they also are my most prestigious projects. So now I end up with a conflict. I think you've been all there multiple times. If not in security incidents, you've been there when you're troubleshooting a customer bug or something that's happened that shouldn't have happened. And meanwhile, in R&D, I used to be a developer. I mean, I need to look back into, where did we have this? How does it look in the portfolio? All the different versions we have on the market. If you have embedded products out on the market, you have probably years of worth of unupdated products out there. So if they're connecting to your backend, well, how do you manage that? So you do the root cause analysis, you try with mitigations, fixes. Your customers start to ask you, when can we have the release that fixes it so that we can move on with our daily business? And in the meantime, InfoSec, IT comes and knocks on your door and says, hey, I'm going to update your laptop. I want to update your mobile phone. The build servers, anyone, can you please update them? Well, sorry, we're building the release to our customers. So what should I prioritize? I can't do both. You choose. And I think it is the story of the past 20 years. If you go to Cloudflare and look at HTTP2, you had the CSO saying that, I've been part of this for the last 20 years. So what can we do? Can we make this better? And I think I can bring a small piece. You all here can do some pieces, and together we can start to address this. Now, we have this voluntary. 2017, you saw some of the guidelines come out on the NISA and European level. You had OWASP top 10 for how many years? Still, we're in this situation, right? So if the market can't regulate it, that's when actually governments are really useful. When the market and the players don't want to do stuff, that's actually when governments can step in and say, okay, now we're going to go in and the regulation will come. So how many of you are familiar with the Ford Pinto back in the 70s? Oh, we have a few. Good, good, good. Go up, watch that. There's a really good American museum putting up a little bit on that case. It's quite fun to read through. But I think you would recognize yourself as software developers that, how can we put in security into our products? Well, it becomes a trade-off. Not so much anymore. This is the same reason why we have round windows on airplanes, the micro cracks in the beginning here. Well, that's just a feature of windows in airplanes. Then, luckily, today we know that we don't make square windows because the stress fractures at the end cause problems. So this is why regulation is coming. So on the market, we've seen too many disruptions. The costs are too high to fix. And anyone who wants to argue that, just look at the privacy breaches, the fines, do that. But also look to yourself. If you ever been ransomware, if you ever been put, you're going to release the market in 2 weeks' time. Suddenly, the system shuts down. You spend a lot of time away from your families, working late nights, to release. And suddenly, things don't work anymore because someone got into the systems and blocked them. So this is a little bit, that's indirect costs. And what they're trying to do now is to move the cost of the incidents, like Coop. I think most of you here have, if you live in Sweden, you bought something from Coop, and you remember when they were ransomware. You had hospital attacks when patient records were locked up. So how can the doctors then know what kind of medication to give? And individuals here, probably some of you, been subject to some kind of hacker attack. Well, you suffer those costs because we have insecure products. So what the industry now trying to do is shift left. And it's cool, actually, to have our politicians, say, shift left. So the way they do that is they imagine protecting society. So that's why you see a strong, accelerated pace of regulations across the world. It's also quite apparent within the conflicts we see in the world. We actually see geopolitical pressures, the vulnerabilities being used, and we actually see a little bit of a fragmentation across the world. America's setting up their systems, Europe setting up theirs, in China they're setting up theirs. And this comes from the political pressure. So if you follow the trade routes, you look a little bit how vulnerabilities is, you find out a little bit on the political systems here. Also, we said here, shift towards the manufacturers. Well, that's us. When we write code, we take pride in what we deliver to the market. And what will happen now is we will have more time to actually do the good engineering work we want to do, and then look to make secure build products. I never heard of developers say, no, I don't want to build secure products. I take pride in my code. It's usually the trade-off towards the market and pushing it out. That becomes an issue. And I think here, that is the problem we're trying to solve here. And this will be a challenge for small and medium businesses, the startups just coming on today, and even large corporations with a huge legacy on the market. So this goes through the entire life cycle of products. So I'm just connecting back a little bit to European Parliament. You can watch this speech. This is Ursula von der Leyen, European Commission President. She said, everything is connected. Everything can be hacked. She connected to the defense of Europe and our systems. And also saying that now Cyber Resilience Act is coming here. So what is the Cyber Resilience Act? It's a horizontal legislation that goes for products with digital elements. We brushed upon that in the beginning, where we see anything basically with a little bit of a software inside, and that can be a chipset. If you buy a chipset from one of the larger manufacturers, you actually get some code and some libraries with them. If you buy an IoT chipset, you can take something for Nordic SD. You actually get a binary blob with that, with a radio stack that's usually proprietary. You might use Zephyr, which is a small operating system on top of that. So all of these things, will be part of the regulation. Now, we'll focus a little bit on how that works out in a minute here. It also puts responsibility to the manufacturers. When we put a product on the market, that is when we make it available for distribution and sale as a part of a contract, then we need to comply with this regulation. I'll come back a little bit how that works. One thing that I think is interesting is also increasing the transparency. I'm a strong advocate for releasing vulnerability disclosures on a responsible method, because I think it is the way that I can understand the risk coming from my supply chain and also to communicate to my customers how they can defend themselves. So when we get that pipeline working, that is something that can help us. And in the end, you will benefit from this individually. Imagine a day when you don't need to have password managers. I think we're trying to fix that with other means. But if you really had a good secure system from the beginning, well, I like security in depth, so I'll probably keep my password manager. Not anyone here making such systems? Sorry, okay. So I'm not trying to put you out of business. I'm just trying to say that, hey, we might be able to lower our cost of our operations if we make more secure products. I think there's an imbalance here. So what are the requirements? They are split up into different categories. So this is from the regulation. I'm going to break it down a little bit, but harmonized rules, that just means that we're going to have a common set of rules that applies to the products with digital elements. That goes actually into the hardware, so if you have an IT product. But it also goes into, like you can see here, photo editing or word processors. Imagine Notepad being CE marked for cybersecurity. That would be an interesting day, right? The calculator, which we love to pop up when we do remote code exploits to demonstrate, hey, we owned your machine. Calculator will be also, cyber secure. So I think when you start to think about that, that's when you can start to grasp it a little bit more. So that just means that we're going to certify the products with digital elements. So what we're going to certify against? Well, we have the essential requirements. I'm going to show them a little bit here. The essential requirements is just a legal way of saying, this is what we expect of you as manufacturers to put into your products. And that's not a lot of news. If you're familiar with application security verification standard, OWASP top 10, there's a lot of lists. If you're working with the NIST, SSDF, those frameworks, they will be in there. We're leveraging them. So if you're already doing all that good work, well, jolly good done by you. Because that is where we are looking when we're also working in standardization organizations. And I think the last one is the interesting part, because we had regulations for products and security requirements, but this is actually organizational capabilities. So we need to be able to disclose vulnerabilities. We need to be able to have means to release security patches and updates. And we can't wait. In the draft now for the Cyber Resilience Act, it says we should address security vulnerabilities without undue delay. I ask you to go back to your legal department and ask precisely what that definition is, but it means that no, you can't not fix things. We need to actually start to work it with some emphasis. We can't just sit wait and say, no, we do that in 6 months' time. Also, it splits up into different categories. So you have the default category. I think this is where most products will end up. Depends on your company profile a little bit what you put on the market here. But 90% is estimated to be, self-assessment. You self-declare. And then you have critical class 1. This is when you need to declare according to a standard. This is where you come into For example, now with Radio Equipment Directive, there is a standard being developed. You need to certify and fulfill that specification to the fullest, or you can go to a test house like you do for CE marking. And the last category, that's when it's mandatory. There's actually one more class. If anyone here is in the NIS 2 domain, we have finance sector perhaps here. I've seen a few banks out here. If you're part of the critical infrastructure systems, there's even more sensitive systems up here. It's just that they didn't put it into the Cyber Resilience Act. That is in NIS 2. So what's obligations? Well, we need to think about this across the entire life cycle. We need to document all risks. Are you doing threat modeling? How many of here inside are doing threat modeling? Good, that's the first step. So you do your threat modeling. What do you do afterwards? You file it somewhere and it's good sometime because someone told you, or you're converting that into a risk. You're converting it into some actions that you want to do. Are you tracking that risk in 6 months' time? This is what we need to do in the future. We know already all of this, so I think this is just a good way for you to talk to your manager, talk to your organization, and start to build out those capabilities. We also need to report exploited vulnerabilities and incidents. They are debating it should be 24 hours, 72 hours. I think it would be aligned with GDPR. That means when we become aware about an actively exploited vulnerability in our products, or we suffer security incidents related to the security of our products, we need to report to market authorities within 72 hours. You remember this without undue delay? So if you've ever been part of a data breach or suspected there's been a data breach, you know there's some tempo behind it. The fines on the Cyber Resilience Act is on the same level. So it's 2.5% in the worst cases, that falls down to 1%, but it's on the global annual worldwide turnover of last year. So we need to be, add that to the risk and you'll probably have the good financial motivation here. We also need to ensure that during the product's lifecycle, we effectively manage these vulnerabilities. You need to provide the security patches for free. You can't subscribe for those. Have you taken that account when you think of your business model? Because you're going to maintain that if you sell it. Also, we need to have clear and understandable instructions. So finally, I bought several products out on the market. If you go to the hardware store and you pick up some copy me product and you open up the manual and say, okay, how am I going to configure this IoT stuff? Well, now it needs to be in a good way written. So I think here, again, good engineering practices. I would just love it when, I put something up, it's secure by default, it just works. We'll see, maybe in 2040 something, we'll be there. Let's see. Also, security updates here. I cannot enough stress this one here, because if you imagine you providing security updates, how many have been involved in a architecture vulnerability? Hands up, I've been there. You're going to swap up something. It's going to take you, how long does it take to rewrite the architecture? So do you think it takes 6 months up with your hands? Do you think 12 months? 24 months? Okay, we see a little bit of vagueness here. So anyone believes it takes 2 weeks? No, okay. So if you look at the vulnerability today in a microchip controller, so if you go out if you take any microcontroller from Espresso, SD, Nordic, TI, etc., you go back to 3-5 years, you find at least one vulnerability, either in the firmware or you find it in the microchip. Do you know the lead time to order microprocessors today? It's in the range of months to a year. It's improved in COVID. That means that if we have a vulnerability in there, in the hardware, well, Cyber Resilience Act is quite explicit. If you can't mitigate it, in operations, by the architecture you put in place, you cannot distribute it. And you will actually see that in a minute here. That means what you're going to do with the chipset on hand. You need to find somewhere to put this. Okay. So the essential requirements, I'm not going to go too deep into them. You will recognize this if you've been working with security by design. There's lots of different standards out there. What I would recommend to you to do, and what we've done, is we'll look at what is the hardest part to change in my product. Is that the API towards your backend? Is that the architecture of how you distribute keys? Is it how you register your users? Is it your privacy by design? Look for those. Look for where the cyclomatic complexity is inside of your code. If you have a high complexity, probably that's going to be painful to change. Then look at what requirements here could build a scenario where you would maybe rally all the troops to fix the vulnerabilities. You would also need to understand your dependencies. Are your contractors educated in this? Is the open source libraries you're using, are they on par with this? I'm going to show you a little bit what you can utilize there in a minute. And your vendors, if you rely on third-party products, are they up and running? RED comes in August 1st, 2025, Cyber Resilience Act, about the year afterwards here. So the obligations here, you need to think about the entire life cycle. You need to document the risks again, report the vulnerabilities, clear instructions. For distributors and importers, sometimes you take something off the shelf, you add your application on a mobile phone and you use it. Well, if you distribute products, you place them on the EU market, you need to ensure that the manufacturer has some appropriate documentation, the products and the manufacturer's processes are compliant, and you need to stop distribution of products if you know, if you confirmed it, or have reason to believe that they are not. That's the actual language in the regulation today. It's quite hard. You know, how many here trust that every part of their supply chain is compliant? Well, I don't. But I'm going to work with them. That's why I'm, for example, here today to speak to a broader audience, to educate on these topics here, because I think that we as an ecosystem, we need to address this together. We also need to coordinate vulnerabilities with users and the manufacturer. This is similar for your car. You know, if a car manufacturer becomes aware of an airbag not functioning, we've seen multiple recalls for that, they need to reasonably reach out to the users to notify them, but also if the distributor becomes aware of a problem, they have an obligation to report it back. And also to notify market authorities in certain regards here. The details are in the legislation here, but it's important that you understand it's not only manufacturers, it's entire the supply chain here. So current status, this is a little bit on how standardization works. In trialogue, that means the Council, the Commission, and the Parliament is currently sitting in a room together and trying to negotiate to come up with the legal text. So when that decision is done, we have an EU election next year. They want to be ready before that. So is the decision in December, in Q1? Probably. This is a prioritized initiative from the EU Commission. So it means they will very hard, strong to try to push it out. And when we looked into the Parliament's votes, there was, I think, 62 persons voting forward and 1 against. They are really aligned to make this happen. Once they voted, it will just get published. That means it becomes law in Europe. Then what happens is, once it's published, we have the first phase, which is relating to vulnerability disclosure. This means that this is when we need to notify. This is a 24, 72-hour notification period. That goes in effect, if it's 12 or 24 months, we'll see when the negotiations are done. And then about a year later, that's when our products and systems and solutions needs to be secured for the essential requirements. So why is this relevant for all of you? Why can't you just sit and relax? Well, you need to ensure adequate capabilities in your organization. We started a program about 6 months to a year ago, to educate our developers, our product managers, our organization, our suppliers, to make sure that we build out the capabilities. And so if you have any security champions, hug them, comfort them, you will need them. Also, make sure that you understand your portfolio. You have a current state. You need to get over to a compliant state. So prioritize the portfolio, prioritize your actions here. And also look through your supply chain here. Unless you are compliant, you can't put products with digital elements on the European market. Simple as that. Non-compliance, that is in line with the GDPR fines. You can find it quite easily. There's different tiers of that. I think they have an understanding that this is moving in an industry. It's not moving a product, it's moving an industry. But still, the regulation is there, the fines are there, and this is just one of the first regulations to come out. So I just want to go quickly say that, when you think this through, start already when your product, when you devise a new product you want to put on the market, ask your product managers, what's the security objectives you want me to fulfill with this product? What's the promise to our customers? When you start to design, look at, not only in Europe, but look, if you're selling to UK, for example, you have the PSTI. If you're selling to Americas, well, you have some labeling schemes coming out. Anticipate them, because it will impact your architecture. Look at threat modeling. Set some security high objectives here. Threat modeling, the risk assessment talked about, super important. Make that second nature. It's not really hard. It's asking how can things break and what would I do in that case. When you're in development, utilize the tools. There are some great tools out there to push up. Where are the weaknesses? Find them easily, quickly. I don't want to find out 2 weeks after I've made a commit that I introduced the vulnerability. I want to find it out the minute I committed. So make sure your CI/CD pipelines and tools are effective, and don't add everything into the baseline. Start small and add it, and do peer review. You all know about good development practices here. Then, when it comes into production, this is where we're going to look in a bit of software bill of materials. So make sure you know what you put on the market, because you will need to go out and fix it on a later time. And that includes also asking your vendors, what is inside of the product I purchased from you? Make sure that when you talk to contractors, you outsource development, you need to put those requirements on the outsourced party, because you are the one putting the product on the market. Then you are responsible for the compliance. Then you manufacture, you put it into production somewhere. You're producing in Europe, you're producing in China. That production needs to stay compliant. It's similar like a car. Just because the car manufacturer found out that airbags had a defect doesn't mean that the supply chain doesn't need to be updated. So if you have an IT product, well, how do you update the products that you have en route to customers? How do you update them in the warehouses? That is also something to think about. Documentation here. When you assemble, you push it out, you put it in the papers. If there's some vague updates, something you're going to add in, features, etc., needs to be documented. And then you're going to certify it. You're going to put it on the market, and then you're going to maintain it. And this is where the security updates comes in play. So now think through, how quickly can we update things? Your time to market from commit until it reaches the market will be a key performance indicator. How quickly can you put it out there? So I just want to go quickly saying the placing of product on the market. This is something I found be a common misunderstanding. So when you release a product, you have a market event, and we think that is, hey, we released the product to the market. But actually, the regulation works a little bit different. So it is when you actually have each individual device that you put on the market, and you can find the examples in the EU Blue Guide. So that means that you need to have produced the unit. It needs to be available to the EU market. It needs to be ready for distribution and consumption. It needs to be the first time that product is there, that's an individual unit. And you need to have an offer where you change the ownership of it. So it can mean that I have an order for IoT products of 10,000 units. But in my warehouse, I have 5,000 units. Those 5,000 units might be compliant today, but the other ones I have not produced yet, right? Takes another month. If Cyber Resilience Act comes in between those other 5,000 units need to be compliant with the new regulation. So manage this transition period. Talk to your operations and supply chain. Review the EU Blue Guide. I think this I found to be a surprise for most developers and some of the product managers as well. So read through this one. This one is important. And it goes back to your supply chain as well. Okay, so changes for and with open source. Open source is free, right? I absolutely love Linux. I worked with some of the kernel maintainers. I work with Yocto. I'm passionate about being able to build great products on top of open source. So in Cyber Resilience Act, they exclude these projects, but there's been some significant concerns that they exclude the open source code, but what if I, as a maintainer, take some money through support? Well, there's a lot of independent developers out there. Then you have Red Hat, which is a commercial business based on also providing an open source Linux distribution with a lot of services connected around it. And the problem is in these two. I listened into the EU Parliament, and they said that there's no reason for open source vendors that have large commercial opportunity based on open source not to be as secure as proprietary products. That was a little bit, okay, wait. Usually I say that proprietary products were less secure because open source, we had a lot of review. But now you can actually see that we have a lot of independent developers. So are you familiar with the scorecard for OWASP? There's for the different projects you can go out and see now how it's maintained, etc. Look at that one. You can see the activity in the project, you can see how they're manufacturing it, etc. But can we expect every open source developer to solve my compliance problems? No. I think this has been the contention here. And it's been discussed quite heavily. So I used to be a system architect and then later a product owner for a Linux project. We based it on top of Yocto. We had about 130 dependencies. And we devised, if you're familiar with this, there's meta layers, how you write the recipes, how to build it up. You select the different libraries and open source projects, the commits you want to be in. And it's sometimes a hassle. If the kernel updates, the manufacturer is not really on par with us. How are we going to solve the dependency conflicts? This here would be quite painful for me to do when Cyber Resilience Act, etc. comes in. But it's something I cannot build this on my own. So it's something that we as a community need to develop together. Something I'm working quite hard together with to voice into European Commission, into the standardization bodies, and explain that we are releasing sometimes these products on a daily basis. If you have automatic updates and you're going to push it out, am I going to do certification on a daily basis? How is that going to work? So we're trying to come up with a model here. It's not easy. So something I did that was quite successfully was we actually show out a lot of the manufacturers' Linux customizations. And I worked very hard with Johan, a subsystem maintainer, to get about 4 patches away from the Linux kernel. I think that is a recipe for success. If you can reduce dependencies so that you are in main line with trusted and well-maintained open source projects, that means that you can move and you don't have to test as much. And I think this is also a way to contribute back to open source community. So in the future, we need to look at maybe another KPI. I know developers don't like KPIs, you like to do engineering work, but talking to your managers, how many dependencies do you have? How do you manage them? So there's a lot of good links. I'm just adding it up here. You probably have the presentation afterwards. So if you just go out and search for these, there's some really good and healthy discussions. I think we need to solve security within open source. But what European Commission is telling me as a manufacturer is, Martin, you're responsible for the open source you put in your products and you put on the market. And I can actually understand that as an individual. Like, I drive a Volvo. I don't want Volvo telling me, yeah, you need to talk to the Linux kernel to get your car fixed. No, I bought my car from Volvo. I want them to fix it. Okay, so there'll be some changes. Security by design throughout the entire life cycle. Find the vulnerabilities, fix them quickly. Make sure you spend some time to make your code secure. And also, we need to take responsibility from code throughout the entire life cycle. From you start to include a dependency in your product until that is off the market, we have an obligation. And also, reports to researchers, from researchers and customers, and align them across the supply chain. And at the core here, this is one of Olle's passions. So if you want to talk to a guru on SBOMs, he's very active in OpenSSF everywhere. I encourage you, I have a little bit of a shout out at the end here. Go talk to Ulla. He's your man, he's your guy on this. At the core of this is the software bill of material. So when you build your code, you have some regulations. RED, you might be operating in an InfoSec domain, ISO 27001. RED, Cyber Resilience Act is coming in. We talked about EU Blue GAN, how you put it on the market. And then you might end up in someone else's IT system, right? Or if you're a bank, you might be on the NIS 2. So you have the DevOps toolchain. So what happens when Cyber Resilience Act is? Well, you find a vulnerability. You get notified of vulnerability in your code. So you treat that as anything else. It's a normal day. The change now with Cyber Resilience Act is when you confirm that vulnerability, in RED, in CRA, if there's an active exploit of a vulnerability, you're not allowed to distribute your product anymore. That's a production stop. So now we're actually breaking up due to regulation. And that's kind of a healthy thing, right? You don't want cars driving around being vulnerable or the brakes not working. They actually do a product recall, and they're using the same mechanisms. So now software will be as secure as the safety of the cars. Security and safety are not diverse things. They are just different means here. So you need to fix it in operations. You need to fix it inside of your factories in the distribution chain. You need to secure your development processes. Malware can hide. This is a place where we love to hide. If we're going to make persistent integration, SolarWinds, etc. So read up on this. There's some good article from NIST. So all products have different multiple components: code, protocols, hardware. Protocols might be part of an open public standard. Some are proprietary, Bluetooth standard. Actually, if you're compliant with Bluetooth, sometimes there are vulnerabilities that are just by the design of the Bluetooth stack. So how do we resolve those? We need to think about these. So the software bill of material is a digital signed file, lists the components, and it was intended in the beginning to work with licenses and understand, do we have any licenses that are restricted for us? We can now use that also to track vulnerabilities, and there are quite a lot of different formats here. There are many uses, not only for vulnerability, but making sure you're compliant, making sure where are the products. So one thing is to send it over to your customers, but also for you to now see, where can I massage this? Can I get down in complexity? There's not one SBOM. This is from CISA in the United States. You have design SBOM, so when you're trying to write up the specification. In your source code, what's the configuration again there? When you build it, sometimes you pull in dependencies, you have not defined the specific version. When you make some analysis of an artifact or executables in the virtual machines, etc., when you spin up a new container, what is inside of that container? When you deploy it on a system, what's deployed? Where are the log4j instances and components? And also in runtime, sometimes you load DLLs, etc. There's a lot of different SBOMs out there. And when we're going to find and hunt down the vulnerabilities that you fixed, we need to look at the different versions we put on the market. So customers, I will ask all my suppliers to come in with SBOMs and say, hey, provide me with your SBOM. I know it's not a public requirement from the regulation, but I want to understand what's in your product. So we can collect those into a vulnerability database. Now, that has some issues. Just because you have a library, curl is not curl. You have Microsoft version, you have Daniel's version, you have a lot of different versions. Are they patched? I think this is when you can start to look into VEX and a few others. And we need to find a good solution to the market. And the EU Commission is saying, we are not mandating to use a specific version. When you report to authorities, you need to. I think we as a market, we also need to gather around. And Ole has some good initiatives here working with Open Source Foundation, OWASP, etc. So look into there. So when we get in these, if I look at my operational environment, if I go to my CISO and ask, the printers, I love printers. No, not really. But which one of these are essential? So when Log4j comes in, I can shut down the printers, I can shut down the non-essential services that have these while we wait for the manufacturer to deploy it. And then we can start to resume business as normal. This is part of business continuity. We've known this for quite some time, but I think now we can start to leverage this one here. We just need to minimize the hassle of everyone asking you. Just because I have a patch here in my container running doesn't mean that it's a vulnerable version, because I modified it. How do we track that? That's going to be a complexity. It's just a file. Text description, nothing fancy. You can read it. The question is how you make use of it. How do you make use of it in your supply chain? How can you make sure that dependency data, etc., how can you make sure that you trust those? There's a really great talk by Google on dependencies and how to navigate this. So I'll leave that as a cliffhanger when you go and watch Ole's talk on SBOMs. So a little bit of things to remember. Likely, this will be law next year. And it's about 1 year, 2, 3 years of grace time. First step, vulnerability. We start to work with this together. Second step, security by design. There's no need to put this in serial. Work with security disclosure already today. Work with security by design already today. It's not hard, it just takes time to get good at. And supply chain attacks are on the rise. We've seen this through the Russia-Ukraine crisis. You might not be the target for a supply chain attack, but your customer. If I want to attack a high-profile customer, I don't go to their gates. I use the milkmaid or anyone else to get into their systems. So the Trojan horse all over again. Cost per dependency will rise. We need to manage that. Remember, security updates are to provide it for free. And you also need to find a good way now to be transparent. And it's scary to go out to a customer and say, sorry, we have a vulnerability. It's going to cost you about 2 weeks' time to fix. Just the way it is. We've done all the things we could. But now, we need to share that risk. I think having that discussion with your key customers, with your key suppliers, your 5 friends around you, how would you solve this? This is similar like in the neighborhood, if there's a lot of burglars going around, you have this initiative in Sweden where you can put up a sign and say, hey, we have a neighborhood watch. Maybe you need something similar here. When something happens, it's human interaction. You trust each other to fix things here. And in the end, we need to take responsibility now. We need to make sure that our products are secure. As manufacturers, as distributors, as importers. I would say we're all in a hurry. You always heard that from security. But now it's coming down to your EBIT, to your financial reporting. So I think you get a better motivation here. Shout out here. You can go to Dataföreningen Väst here to talk EU CRA or Cybernorden. Ole will be having some here on SBOMs. And with that, I want to say thank you.